Today, you can buy several tulips for a couple of dollars. In 1637, you could buy every house on your street for a couple of tulips. The year is 1637, right in the middle of the Dutch Golden Age. This is the era of names such as Rembrandt, Christian Huygens, and Johannes Vermeer. And even though it was in a golden age, the Dutch Republic was a new country, founded only half a century ago when it revolted against the Spanish Empire and started the 80 Years' War. This golden age was spurred in a large part due to the Dutch Republic's invention of early capitalism. And it is here, in Amsterdam, that the first company was founded, the first stock exchange created, and as we will see over the course of this series, it's the place where the first financial bubble burst. This is the story of Tulipmania. But what even is a financial bubble? For us economic nerds, this is easy to understand. For the rest of you, here is a short example. Let's say you have a Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin costed you $100. A little later, you sell that Bitcoin for $150, earning you a profit of $50. That evening, you meet with your friends and you tell them all about how you just made $50 with Bitcoin. Your friends, of course, want the same profit, so they buy a bunch of Bitcoins, hoping to sell it later at an even higher price. After a week, they sell each of their Bitcoin for $200. And then new people come in to buy Bitcoin, hearing of all this profit being made. Over time, more and more people come in. Each person is betting they will be able to sell at a higher price to the next person. But eventually, you run out of buyers. You run out of the next person. And then the price goes down. It crashes. This is an economic bubble. And like all bubbles, they must eventually burst. Tulips originally came from Persia and traveled via the Ottoman trade to Western Europe in the 16th century. Tulips come in a variety of colors, and they rapidly became prized above all other flowers. The Dutch Republic saw the rise of a new middle class, and these merchants and traders were willing to pay large sums of money for the newest, the latest, the most spectacularly colored tulips. Each year, new varieties were cultivated. In particular, there was one type of tulip that was prized above all other types of tulips. This tulip had dark-colored stripes or flames on a light background. But what is interesting is that they did not get this color due to the flower's genetics, but because of a virus. But this is the early 17th century, and the field of genetics wouldn't exist for another 200 years. This meant that as a tulip grower, you could never be sure whether you had an ordinary tulip or an extremely valuable flaming tulip. This made tulips a risky investment. Tulip traders usually had their own private garden, but there were no professional tulip traders. As far as I could find out, none of them were. They all had a day job, and tulip growing and trading was a side business for them, a hobby. These men belonged to a new middle class, which was just forming in the Dutch Republic, thanks to the Dutch East India Company and the vast wealth it brought with it. But just because tulips were a hobby didn't mean they were amateurs. In fact, these men knew a lot about this plant, and growing the best one was a serious hobby, not just a casual one. And by the 1620s, a beautiful new flower had emerged. The Semper Augustus. God, don't you just love that name? Anyway, the Semper Augustus was owned by one man, and he was crafty. He knew that if he sold the offspring of this tulip, it was only a matter of time before his customers would grow more, and then he would have competitors, meaning that he would have to lower his price to compete with competitors. So he did what most companies would do in this situation: create a monopoly, meaning that he was the only one who was able to sell the Semper Augustus. But how did he do it? Because if he sold his tulip, his customers would automatically be able to grow more of them. Well, he created a special kind of contract with very specific terms. First, you weren't even allowed to sell your tulip without the express permission of the original owner. And secondly, you weren't allowed to sell any of the offspring from the tulip bulb either. As you might imagine, many traders did not honor this contract, and many an angry merchant went to the Dutch notary office to file an official complaint. Records of these complaints can still be found in the archives of many Dutch cities to this day, and it is through these records that we know just how much tulips were worth during that time. Even though not all merchants honored the deal, most of them did. This way, he was assured that he could control how many of his precious Semper Augustus were being sold, and as a result, the price went up. By 1623, the price for a single Augustus Semper tulip bulb was worth 1,000 guilders. By the end of 1625, that price had risen to 3,000 guilders. To put this into perspective, a skilled artisan such as a carpenter would earn about 300 guilders per year. So that meant that by 1625, a carpenter would have to work 10 whole years, not spend any of that on food or a house or anything, and then after 10 years he would finally be able to take all his money to a tulip trader and buy a single bulb. And that's without the price going up even further than it already did. And to put this in modern day perspective, an average carpenter in the Netherlands earns about 30,000 euros per year, meaning this bulb would cost about 300,000 euros. 300,000 euros for a single bulb. Because my audience comes from a variety of countries, here is how much it would have cost in other popular countries among my viewers. A single tulip of the most valuable breed could sell for 10 times the average yearly wage. In the 1630s, the tulip trade started to change, and one change led to another until eventually the whole thing had become unsustainable and the entire tulip trade would eventually collapse. So let's look how this started. First of all, a system of colleges developed across the main towns in the Dutch Republic, each composed of a core of small traders. They met at a specific inn, usually 2 or 3 times per week, and usually in the evening, as most traders had a day job. Outsiders were welcome, but only through an introduction. Deals took place with the mediation of 1 or 2 neutral observers, and all sales were sealed with a payment of a small surcharge called de wijnkoop, or a wine purchase, of about 2.5%. This 2.5% was spent on food, tobacco, wine, and other luxury goods at the inn. But there was a problem. While there was a large variety of bulbs, the problem was that they couldn't sell as many or as often as they wanted to. Tulips don't grow very fast. You can't harvest every autumn like most crops. In fact, it could take several years before a tulip is able to bloom for the first time. So until it bloomed, you weren't sure what your tulip was going to look like. And so the first change happened. A new type of contract started circulating. A futures contract. Now, some of you are scratching your head, wondering what the hell a future contract is. Well, a future is a type of contract where the buyer purchases a product and then the seller delivers that product once it's ready. So in the case of tulips, you would sign a contract for a tulip bulb, but you don't take possession of the bulb just yet, because you wait until it flowers. Well, since you have a contract which states that the owner of the contract is the owner of the tulip, you can simply sell that contract. After all, a futures contract states that the bearer of the contract is also the owner, so give that contract to someone else and now they are the owner of the tulip. Simple. But why would you buy a tulip if you don't even know whether it is the one you wanted? Well, a future has the advantage that as the buyer, you can usually purchase the product at a lower price in exchange for taking extra risk. As the seller, you reduce your risk by selling early, and so you are assured to make a profit. Maybe not as much as you would otherwise make, but hey, that's why you're selling futures anyway. You don't want to take that risk. So at this point, in 1634, people had slips of paper stating the ownership of a tulip bulb. Remember how I said earlier that traders would only buy and sell tulips while they were in bloom, so they could assess the quality. Well, with a slip of paper, you could much more easily trade tulip bulbs. You no longer needed to wait until a flower bloomed. You could now sell it at any time you wanted. And this is the second major change in the tulip trade. Before, tulip trading was highly seasonal. People would come in, they would look at the tulip, and then the flower would be sold. But now, you could trade it at any time you wanted. So if a particular brand of tulips generally looks good, then you'd pay whatever the price of that particular brand of tulip is at that moment. This makes sense. If a particular breed was worth 10 guilders at the time, you could buy that breed knowing that this flower was probably around 10 guilders anyway, as breeds don't vary that much in appearance. That makes sense. We do the same now when we purchase online. We don't go to the warehouse to check if the smartphone you want to buy is really as good as we've been told. We simply trust that a smartphone is a certain quality and that it is worth a certain amount of money. Simple. Well, not really. But before we delve further into the pit of financial collapse, let's have some trivia to break up this video. Tulips would often be named after the owner or a city, with words added to suggest high quality, such as general or admiral. And as the price of tulips increased, so did the extravagance of naming them. In order to make their bulb sound ever more impressive, there were tulips such as General of Generals of Gouda. Because one general wasn't good enough, apparently. As someone working in marketing, I can respect this type of naming system. Okay, so people were now trading slips of paper stating the ownership of a bulb. And as a result, people were now trading more and more. Prices were soaring at this point. And this led to the third major change. When people heard of the insane amounts of profit the tulip traders were making, they wanted in on the action. So many new traders entered the tulip market that it changed everything about the tulip trade. And as prices grew, more and more people who knew nothing about tulips wanted to get in on the profitable tulip trade. So people who knew very little about tulips started buying tulips with the idea that they could sell them for a profit in the future without ever wanting to own a tulip themselves or plan on making a profit on them that was sustainable. They weren't interested in tulips, they were interested in profits. And these new traders changed the tulip trade. It was no longer about a single bulb or a particular breed of tulip. No. From now on, traders were far more interested in buying large amounts of tulips in order to make the most profit. Now, not all tulips were equal and each breed had its own price. But it was no longer about the quality of each individual tulip bulb. Futures contracts, which previously told you owned a single bulb, now turned into contracts stating you owned 10 or 50 bulbs. And so, with people who knew almost nothing about tulips, buying large sums of tulips while at the same time being told that the price can only go up. If you remember my example of Bitcoin in the last episode, you may have already guessed where this is going. Prices grew faster and faster. They began to skyrocket by the end of 1636, a few months before the collapse of the tulip prices. Within 3 months, individual bulbs were sold dozens of times and increasing in price more than 10-fold. And the prices of cheaper bulbs increased as much as 20-fold, all in the space of 3 months. Even the most common bulbs, the ones nobody really cared about, were now sold for large sums. By this point, a single bulb was able to purchase a large house. Or, if you had a really valuable one, you could buy an entire villa. This was the height of Tulipmania. The prices were now so high that you could buy an entire street for only a couple of tulip bulbs. More and more people joined the tulip trade, hoping to buy a couple of bulbs now and sell them for a profit later. But the price only increased because people were expecting it to increase. Now, you might have thought to yourself, how is this any different from gold or company shares today? People often buy it in the hopes that it will be worth more in the future. The difference here is that both of these goods provide actual value to many people and are thus valuable for more than just being a tradable good. We use gold in wedding rings, a medium of exchange, and in electronics. It creates value for you. Jewelry, while being a luxury, still provides value. If, like in the past, you can only buy something using gold, then you will want gold in order to buy things you want to have. And electronics are valuable, so you can watch my videos. Likewise, company shares give you value because you now own a part of a company and you receive a dividend. And sure, a tulip has value because it's pretty, but it's not 10 years of salaries pretty. This is what makes a bubble a bubble. The actual value of the product is a lot lower than the amount of money for which it is traded. And the price was just going up endlessly, it seemed. What is important to remember is that nobody at the time knew for certain what would happen. This was the first bubble, so nobody was sure what would happen in the end. The very idea of a bubble didn't exist yet. There was no previous experience to draw upon. To most people, it just seemed like business as usual. Most people. But not all. The prices were becoming so high that some people couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the prices were too high. If maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't keep increasing in price in the future. And if maybe, just maybe, they should sell their tulips before the price would drop. But even though this quiet had been building, the end still came sudden and unexpected. It is the evening of February 5th, 1637. Traders have come together inside an inn in the Dutch city of Haarlem. The men buy a drink, light a cigar, and warm up at the fire. Soon the trading is about to begin. As men take their seats, the first bubble is presented. It is a small bulb, weighing less than half a gram. It's of a valuable breed, but not even close to mature yet. The men start bidding, and it's sold for 56 guilders. About 2 months worth of salaries for a carpenter. Next, another man shows his tulips, this time on a piece of paper. It reads that the owner of this contract will be able to collect a bulb weighing about 5 grams. Still not mature yet. The men look at each other, but nobody makes an offer. Nobody thinks they can make a profit on this bulb. Nobody is willing to take the risk. Eventually an offer is made, but it's lower than expected. It is sold for only 10 guilders. That's okay, the trader thinks. He will just make a profit the next time. This isn't so bad. This is just a one-time setback, right? Another tulip trader comes and shows his own wares. A piece of paper is presented. A mature bulb weighing over 50 grams. Again the men look around. Again nobody bites. And again the merchants only buy it for a much lower price than expected. The men start getting nervous. The price appears to be going down, not up. They have tulips of their own. Tulips that are now worth far less than at the beginning of the evening. So they decide to sell their tulips now, instead of waiting for the price to drop even further. And as soon as some traders start selling, the price goes down because there are now more tulips being sold. So in order to compete with the other traders, they now have to lower their price. But as the prices get lower, more traders sell their tulips, meaning they are forced to lower the prices even more, leading to even more people selling, leading to even lower prices, meaning more people sell, meaning lower price. This cycle continued throughout the evening, until by the end of the night, prices had fallen dramatically. By some estimates, prices had dropped by as much as 95%. 95% in a single night. And what happened in Haarlem spread to other cities. Some traders decided to be crafty and take a horse to the nearest city and sell all their now worthless bulbs before the price in other cities would crash as well. And as buyers, sellers and collectors traveled, prices crashed across the country. Within 4 days the bubble had burst across the Dutch Republic. So what happened? Why did nobody see this coming? And an even more important question, how come this cycle has repeated itself so many times since the first crisis? Why wasn't the first financial bubble also the last? Well, this question can, in large part, be explained with one simple answer. Trust. During the bubble, there were prominent traders who everybody looked up to as sources of trustworthy information. And they said that tulip bulbs are a good investment. So if you don't know enough about the business to make your own assessment, you trust somebody else's. Just as you trust a car mechanic about cars, a carpenter about wood, and a doctor about medicine. And so, people trusted traders about trade. But what happens if they are wrong? Well, you have a bad investment at best, and a financial bubble at worst. To compare this with a modern day example, the crisis of 2008 happened because we trusted otherwise trustworthy rating agencies on so-called subprime mortgages. They said they were good investments, while in reality they were not. And so banks, investors and borrowers trusted them to be safe investments. But when it turned out they were not, the bubble burst and an economic crisis was created. Just as people trusted tulips to be a safe investment because other, more knowledgeable, more experienced traders said they were. And when it turned out they weren't, the bubble burst, and people lost a lot of money. I hope you learned something here. Not just a fun story to tell at a party or at the dinner table, but I hope that you learned some actual economic concepts. That a financial bubble isn't created by a couple of evil people sitting in a room plotting doom, but rather, it's a process of one risky investment after another. In the first episode, we talked about how tulips were introduced to the Netherlands and became an expensive luxury product. Then merchants created a lucrative, albeit exclusive trade in tulips. Then a future contract was introduced, allowing people to trade papers stating the ownership of tulips rather than the physical flowers themselves. That led to more people trading in them, and as more people traded, the price went up, until eventually it just didn't anymore, and then it crashed. So who is to blame here? Was it the original traders? The futures contract? Allowing new people to join the trade? Or are none of them to blame? And is this just the course of events leading to an unfortunate end result? You tell me. I'm not going to tell you what to think. I think my audience is smart enough to form their own opinion. But I hope that now you understand how an economic bubble happens. That this is not some evil master plan set in motion years ago, but rather a series of seemingly good decisions that benefited the individual but led to the collapse of the trade for the whole collective. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like it. My next video will start a new series on the Aztec Empire. If you want to see that and other videos as soon as it comes out, press the subscribe button.